Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 77. We're going to be talking about World War Z, the Max Brooks book from 2006. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org, and you can, of course, follow us on Spotify or whatever platform you use. Couple of caveats really quick. This is during the COVID lockdown, so the audio is not as optimum as we like to have it. And that includes what's happening in the background there, Chad?
Well, I live in West Oakland, which is, as many of you may know, if you live in the Bay Area, a industrial hellscape that has some yuppie condos peppered throughout it. And one of the only vibrant signs of life in the neighborhood is the scrub jay, which is a tiny little bluebird that is quite loud and likes to party. And so there's a scrub jay, and then there's another bird, I think is just some sort of finch, which is the higher pitched one. So there's a squawk and a high pitched whistle. And the only reason why I know about any of these interesting birds in my neighborhood is from that podcast, Crime Pays But Botany Doesn't, which I fucking love.
That's a good title. I've never heard of it.
Yeah, the guy, he's like this old school kind of like environmentalist punk rocker dude from Chicago. He's got a very, very thick Chicago accent. I don't know if he puts it on for the show or not, but he's just a very opinionated, crusty old punk, old, probably like my age, but he's really super knowledgeable about botany and just environmental issues and wild land, rewilding and all that shit. It's a great show. It's like, I don't know. I mean, it's not really like anything else. I don't even know who I would recommend it to, but I fucking love it.
Cool. All right, I guess last thing before we get into this book is spoilers ahead, and it's probably worth noting spoilers for the movie as well, although if I can help it, we won't be talking about it too much.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start with this one?
Well, I mean, I guess we could probably start with where this novel sits in its current place in genre history, which is in 2006. It was a little, not quite ahead of the zombie revival, but one of the earlier pieces. You had, of course, 28 Days Later and Shaun of the Dead were big hits. And then I don't play video games, but Resident Evil looms large in the background. And the Walking Dead comic is already out at this point. I don't know that the show is already moving, but this book really starts out of an earlier book that Max Brooks wrote called The Zombie Survival Guide, which was this sort of Boy Scout manual for surviving a possible zombie apocalypse. And it was insanely popular. And then he went on to write World War Z, which is kind of a take on the tradition of oral war stories. Most notably, I guess, Studs Terkel's The Good War, which is about World War II. So,
which you've read, right?
Yeah, which I love. I highly recommend it. I have this kind of like lifelong goal of reading all the Pulitzer Prize winning books by year, and it's just one of them in that mix. And it's like 900 pages. It is absolutely excellent because it's each chapter tells a different person's story, and it ranges all over the place. It is, you have the kind of traditional like Easy Company takes France stories, but you also have what it was like to be discriminated against as a black tank driver, or, a woman suddenly working in factories, or somebody interned in a Japanese camp in San Francisco. It's a very, very good book. I think that if you're a fan of World War II in any capacity and haven't read that book, you've done yourself a disservice.
And what's the title again?
The Good War.
Oh, here it is. The Good War, An Oral History of World War II from 1984 by Studs Terkel. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like it definitely predates the idea of books like Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, that tremendous fucking buzzkill of a book. But it is one of the earlier,
Wow.
it is one of the earlier examples of a really popular history book that didn't just have like flag waving, like encomium for everyone involved. It is a very good book. I wouldn't say it's like controversial at all, but it is excellent.
What's encomium?
Oh, like praise, like
okay.
praise, usually in like a formal setting.
I thought that was a drug and you were using a metaphor or something.
No. I'm currently not snorting any encomium.
You should. I mean, the thing that is hard not to want to just plunge into is, we're in quarantine and this book has so many resonances with what we're experiencing right now.
Totally. And it's so totally valid. And
Yeah.
then, this book sort of got lumped in as a post 9/11 novel. Like that's kind of like when people were writing about this book at the time, other than just the glowing praise it received from pretty much everybody. It really was like kind of a fuck. I totally lost track of what I was saying.
Well, I think that this as as a post 9/11 story, on this podcast, you and I are sort of covering more apocalyptic things, and including something like Safe. Like we're definitely addressing COVID and looking at
Hmm.
these films and books that sort of resonate with what we're experiencing right now and drawing connections. But this book does so deeply. And he's, of course, Max Brooks, the author, being kind of brought out on stage a lot lately. Like,
Yes.
he's
Yeah.
getting a lot of interviews. He did that viral video with his dad about social distancing that's kind of adorable.
Hmm.
And I think one thing that he is saying that is interesting is when people are referring to some of the things that I'm sure we'll talk about that almost seem prophetic from this book compared to what we're collectively experiencing globally, is that his response is, well, I didn't really create anything. And everything in this book is
Yes.
kind of taken from SARS and AIDS and
Yeah.
different wars that have been fought over history. And so saying that this is prophetic is like, well, no, it's history led up to this. And I saw this coming and we all saw it coming if we looked at history. And that's what this
Yeah.
book is. It's resonant with the most obvious outcome of human foible, right?
Yeah. And I was going to say, the conversation was about 9/11, but he's always been very clear that what this book is really about is the fragility of the systems we rely on.
Yes.
And then I love that you talked about connection, because he talks about that, like that really what this book is about is the breakdown of connections and systems and small groups of people, from the family level all the way up to the national and international level. It's all about this. And then he talks quite a bit about how it's a critique of the American tendency towards isolationism. But
Yep.
I don't know exactly what he's talking about, because it hasn't felt like America's been isolationist since at least World War II. Like that's some Teddy Roosevelt level shit.
Well, he might be kind of addressing the Trumpian veering towards that brand of nationalism. I don't know how it's playing out
But in the
with.
book, though, you know what I mean?
Oh, in the book, I
yeah.
don't. In the book, I don't quite see it. In the book, there's a lot of critique of America and a lot of praise for
Hmm.
America. I think that's actually something that's very interesting about what he does. Is he takes a lot of cultures and countries to task, like Israel and China and America, but
Hmm.
then also is, very pro-Israel, very pro-America at the same time,
Yeah.
which makes it an interesting and complicated story he's telling.
Yeah, what I like about him is like he's doing something that I always try to do, like when I'm like writing stuff on social media or whatever, which is like I want to like acknowledge the worst things about a thing and ridicule them, and also kind of celebrate the things that are to be celebrated about them as well. And I think he does that pretty well with all these different countries. It's not any deeper than what you get from a video game, like if you were choosing your world and civilization or something like that in some ways, but it works for the story, and it's just fun. I mean, the scariest fucking group. I think he goes after. I think he goes after China the most, and
Yes.
that seems the most prescient.
Yep.
And it's interesting that stuff was sort of extracted from the movie so that this movie could be sold in China.
And it didn't even work because
It
China
did
doesn't
not
allow
work.
zombie stories. Fucking, I hate Hollywood so much when shit like this comes out.
Yeah, Hollywood's terrible. I mean, and to me, like China is awful. Hollywood is the fucking worst. Like like the fact that like you and what I don't know. We'll just park that for a second when we get to the what China did wrong in the zombie apocalypse section of the show, I guess. But it's interesting. Like the other thing you said was about connection was I saw this talk that he did in front of like a naval warfare group or something like that, and they brought him in as an expert on pandemics, or not pandemic, like just like the fallout from pandemics, I guess. Because the nice thing about zombies in general is they're sort of like an X in an algebraic equation of apocalypticness. Like you just drop zombies in, and like whatever the fallout is, it could be like aliens invading or Yosemite blowing up or pandemic, whatever. So he got brought in to talk, and what he advocated for was a class of person that their whole job was just to see the connections between things. And what I thought about was like, those are conspiracy theorists, man. Like
Oh,
that's like kind
dude.
of their job. And he's
Oh.
talking about like making these connections. And that's kind of what he did with his book. And what's so interesting about it is like, he just, like you said, took stuff that existed, took the worst case scenarios and then just stitched them together in what feels like a very, like a person who was kind of with it would put this stuff together like this. Like I don't know anybody who likes this book who's had any issues with like the way anybody was portrayed nationally or not. I mean, who knows? I haven't really had those conversations with people, but like that hasn't been a conversation around this book or property, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are some strange holes in it. I think one very bizarre hole is there are virtually no women in this entire book, and it
I
granted it's a war book and
don't
generally
know. I mean,
hmm?
there's great the female story, like the story about the woman she's the pilot and she crashes in Louisiana, and then she has like the person that helps her out.
I'm not saying they're not good stories. I'm saying like, okay, let's see. There are how many chapters?
Yeah, I guess we
Uh,
can get an actual count.
like 40 interviews? I don't know. And like 3 of them are women.
Uh,
Maybe
there's like
5,
the
maybe
Russian
5 at
lady. I mean,
most.
yeah, I don't know. It feels at the very least pretty spread around culturally, though.
Culturally, it is. It's
Yeah.
just very bizarre that he's leaned so far away from women's experiences of this. God, those birds sound great.
Yeah,
um,
they're sweet.
anyway, that's just a very bizarre hole that you could look at it as being, well, most war stories where it's about battle are, of course, going to lean towards the stories of men. But that's not what this war story is.
Mm-mm.
This is a war story about survival and people. And it seems that women are not people enough for most of what he finds worth talking about for some reason.
I wonder in a like an event like this, like if there would be an equal number of men and women dying, or if it would skew in either direction.
To know, I mean,
You know,
but that's also a really interesting thing about what I love that he does in this book is that the question of who survives and why is as random as the human experience tends to be.
mm-hmm.
There's like big chested, brazen, brave men who are slaughtered, and there are cowards who survive. And it's just every human experience thrown into this stew.
Yeah, like it's just this wave of death that's coming. It's not there's not really any way to like deal with it ideologically. So it makes the reason why I was thinking about the skewing one way or the other, like, you could think, oh, if men are whatever on average faster than women, maybe they would outrun zombies more often. But also men are more impulsive, so maybe they take more risks and more men died. Like I really like I've never thought of that in a zombie story. That'd be an interesting zombie story. Like you walk out, like what happens if there's no men or no women left?
Right. Let's keep coming back to COVID. My experience of walking around San Francisco, at least, is the number of men I see unmasked compared to women is very disproportional. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's the impulsive rashness, like I spend too much time at the gym to be taken down by a virus or something. I don't know. I can only theorize about what's going on with how machismo plays itself out against a virus and against good advice. But that's how people die. It's very bizarre. This thinking about COVID and World War Z brings me back to something we talk about a lot, which is the book The Gift of Fear. And it makes me question about, with COVID, how serious would the virus have to be for more people to take it more seriously, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that we see with a lot of threats against human life, and it's through this book, is people denying its existence, people lying about it, people downplaying it, whether it's governments for personal gain or religious people for some sort of denial because they have other priorities. And, obviously a zombie apocalypse is the most extreme example of how a virus or a disease can destroy a planet. But with COVID, I feel like it's just south of being total destruction to be taken seriously enough by more people, at least in America, or cultures where the distrust of authority is so rampant. It's something that Max Brooks has said several times that I think is very interesting is that in America, in the 60s, the left really fomented a distrust of authority and the government. And then in the 80s, the right did the same thing. And now we are left in a country where there really isn't an authority. We don't know who to look to and who to believe to give us advice that we can all collectively get behind and follow. And that's one of the many reasons why we're doing so poorly against something that is fairly straightforward to resist, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's Max Brooks does such a good job of being like pessimistic and optimistic about the human race for extremely realistic reasons. Like there are moments in the story where the word is out and it's fucking zombies, and yet still people do the wrong thing. Like notably the guy who develops the fake rabies vaccine called Phalanx. That guy, like it is already a problem when that guy's drug hits the market, and it makes everything even worse because people sort of like, oh, this thing, it's a salve, it's going to save us. It's a silver bullet. So I think people trust in that shit a little bit too much. And, that opens them up for, it's like someone else is going to solve the problem. Like that's the whole thing. Like that's the people who are like really like, philosophically libertarian, always critique government people of is like, oh, well, you think the government's just going to take care of, you're eventually going to be fucked. Like the government's not going to come for you. And that happens in this book. Like there's a scene after the army has gone from the West Coast to the East Coast in Yonkers. One of the, to like retake Yonkers, they're talked about how like in a lot of the cities they go to, people are like, well, where were you? Where were you? But also at the same time is everybody kind of survives because of their own personal effort at an extremely local level. So it's kind of like an anarchist dream in some ways. Like, and then what's very peculiar is like how no one develops the same strategies. You know what I mean? Like some people have the box method where they form the box and shoot in, and then the French like fight street to street with like spiked hand weapons, and the Russians just basically like treat it like World War II and just attack with
just keep sending
AK-40s.
out. Yes. Oh my God.
If I was going to make a movie of any specific portion of this book, it would be the Russian front. I mean, I think it is just such a it's the most interesting. Upon rereading it, it's the most interesting like part of the world in this story to me. The fact that they go from, essentially like kind of like, I guess they don't really cover it up, but they're kind of quiet in the way that Russia is about COVID. It seems very realistic.
Yeah.
And then it gets fucking super bad. And they have to deal with the fact that their economy isn't really geared to like solve shit like this. So they crack open old ass crates full of AK-47 ammo and just pour mean fucking Russians onto the problem. And then at the end of it, they are an expansionist theocracy, which is super fascinating. And then the monologue that the girl gives, that when she's talking about the return of the Tsar and the unification under the Russian Orthodox Church, when she says like Russians are what we are again, people are afraid of us again, it's so fucking scary. Like she's the scariest thing in the book,
Yeah, for sure.
I love that shit.
Max Brooks himself said, I read this quote where he said, diseases like zombie outbreaks start slow and small and need our mistakes to grow. And I think you had used the word mistakes. To me, this book is largely about failure. Almost the first 3 quarters are about humans failing. And we get to see some pretty ingenious ways that he's created of how humans have fought back and strategized for survival and retaliation, but largely it's about failure and America's failure very specifically.
Yeah.
Something that's disturbingly prescient is that this book takes place in an American election year, and part of the issue in America is that the plague is downplayed for political points, which is crazy.
Yeah, Max Brooks's politics are very interesting to me, and that like, Mel Brooks is a World War II hero. Like
Yep.
he diffused minds. He was like, one of the really funny things is on one of the late night episodes where Stephen Colbert was interviewing Max Brooks, he was asking him what it was like to be, raised in his family, and his mother. What's his mother's name?
And Bancroft.
Yeah, so he's raised by Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft, and they asked him, like, like, are you a scared person? Do you think of this stuff? He's like, well, I was raised by two super hardcore paranoid people, and then I guess Anne Bancroft was like really terrified of kidnappings,
Yes.
and then she would like scare him by like explaining to him in detail like how he was going to be kidnapped.
Yep.
And then Mel Brooks at home was like Colonel Brooks or whatever his real name is. I can't remember what it is, and so he had this sort of like greatest generation hard assery of always being ready and prepared, plus the idea, Jews since World War II have been on edge, understandably, so there's all that sort of mixing in, and it's creating this sort of like focus on how things can go bad. And then, humans, as per the book Gift of Fear, are kind of wired for thinking about bad things. And just most people just don't do the research and worry, which I think is kind of what's special about Max Brooks, is he's
Isn't
like
that weird?
taken all these things, and put them together. And a book that I was thinking about as I was rereading or actually re-listening to this book was The Disaster Diaries by, I can't remember his name. Hold on. Fuck. Did you ever read that book?
I did. I don't remember the author's name either, but yeah, it's just another sort of like, here are all the ways you can deal with the worst things that can possibly happen.
Sam Sheridan.
Thank
It's
you.
by Sam Sheridan. Yeah. But yeah, in that book, that guy did the research. He went out around the world. He saw some real deal shit. But his perspective was that like people just always kind of come together. And I don't think that's real, man. I think
No.
sometimes they do. But like,
Depends
if
on the culture,
anything,
depends on the people.
Yeah, like if you're Thailand and there's a tsunami, you're giving each other your shoes, and taking care of people. But if you're Orange County,
Right.
it's COVID-19, you guys
fully.
can go fuck yourselves.
Fully. I just want to go back a second and address a little more about bibliographic information about Max Brooks, is that this was also partly backgrounded by his experience watching his mother, Anne Bancroft, die of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
He said he was very inspired. Well, inspired is the wrong word. I can't remember how he framed it exactly, but the experience of watching the mighty Anne Bancroft, who, one of the Hollywood legendary greats, succumb and die to this awful disease is absolutely woven into his thoughts about death and decay and watching everything wither away, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But something I wanted to also point out is the way he characterizes America is very complex. I mean, I find that part of this narrative and part of what I do believe about this glorious country I just got to recently become a part of is that we're victims of our own success. You can really trace a weird lineage from the greatest generation to the baby boomers to a certain character of chaos that's happening in America, where it's possible for people to be so distrustful of authority. That's something that this country has collectively created. What do you think about going soft, about cultures going soft, and whether America is a victim of its own success that way?
There definitely seems to be something about, like, I don't know that our cultures go soft, but I think they can go decadent, but not in the way that, like, a lot of people love this idea of the decline of the West and how we're just like Rome and it's the end. And, you can tell because there's all these transgenders and queer people and that's what marks it. I think that shit is completely fucking misguided. I think what can happen to a culture, though, is it can become extremely unbalanced and fall apart. Like if a country is not working for everyone, the people who it's not working for, if there's enough of them, are going to eventually start, they're going to be at the gates eventually. And, as a group of people that are in control, like you should have a better handle on like understanding the mix and how people are connected. And I think that's like kind of a really smart way World War Z starts off, is that like, the government is consistently portrayed as bloated and inefficient and obsessed with technology. And he doesn't make a whole lot of like moral arguments against individuals. Like, for example, there wouldn't be like, well, this is why the fucking rednecks in Mississippi didn't make it. Like, he doesn't play that game. He kind of puts more of the blame on the government. And I think that, like, it's something about like the size of systems, maybe. Like, I think there definitely is. Like, whenever people point toward like the top 10 countries and how awesome they're doing, they're all really fucking small countries. You know what I mean? Like, I think that like
they're generally small countries with a very homogenous cultural population too.
Totally. And I think that like, I don't know, like America just seems too big and unwieldy. It's not decline, it's something else. And I think, yeah, the whole thing about history does repeat itself or whatever, but if you keep looking for those repetitions, you're going to miss the evolutions. And I think like the problems we're facing are probably unique to us. Like, there's never been a larger, more powerful country with as diverse of a population, with as much of a income inequality, or it's a crazy place. It's like the knife edge of modernity is America. It's just weirdness.
Yep. I think something that comes into play here when looking at what is ostensibly a war novel, historical, and America is framing that America is, the mightiest fighting force in the history of the universe that hasn't won an armed conflict in over half a century.
Well, it hasn't won a direct war. I mean, like that
okay,
the whole like,
okay, fair.
Yeah. I mean the guerrilla. I mean, but that's a good point, though. I mean, that's what Hackworth's book About Face is about. It's basically like, America had the biggest, mightiest army that ever existed that can't deal with some rebels in Vietnam. It's a totally different situation.
Yep. Or the Middle East, which is bizarre, or the war on drugs, or the war on terror. It seems that we haven't been able to win actual wars, so we've declared war on things that are resolutely unwinnable, which is bananas, which is hard to not just draw conspiracy theories out of, right?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, at a certain point, you're like, do people just fail this hard, or is this just engineered ineptitude, or maybe a combination of both? Like, I mean, to me, it feels like there's a meme that I love that said anybody who's a conspiracy theorist has obviously never been a project manager.
Right.
But I've been around like pretty high level executives who make decisions based on like weird fluctuations in the world that have consequence for the business. So I think you can be a type of person that takes advantage of things that seem like they would be conspiratorial. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think anybody who's listened to this podcast more than a few times knows where we feel about the Chinese government, but something that is addressed in this book that maybe, is perhaps a little easier for us to address because 1/4 of this podcast is Jewish, is how this is something you brought up in some text messages with me, is how it addresses Israel.
Yeah, it's very peculiar. Like, Max Brooks says the only character that is the same in the novel and the movie is the Israeli, like the extremely Jewish guy who talks about, I saw zombies and I took them for their word. Like that guy, like who is like the most, and he's like, they just nailed it. He's like, that's the best part of the movie if you're looking for the book to be represented in the movie. And it's interesting, like that is a tradition of Judaism, is to have this sort of like 10th man, this person who, the whole Talmud is about like not interpretation and acceptance of the teachings, but fucking arguing about it. So it's like, the intelligence and argumentativeness of the Jewish culture as Max Brooks is representing it pays off pretty well, and you have to imagine he's writing a lot of that with like personal tongue in cheek with his family experiences, but then when it comes time for Israel to like take care of shit, they wall everything off. They have a really strong plan. Their kind of existing infrastructure, the existing IDF infrastructure sort of like helps them out, but then they take everybody in. Like they don't only take in Jews, they take in Palestinians, and then that causes basically a civil war within their own government. And I think, I don't know if it's well played or not, but he kind of is like, hey, look, the people who are making all the trouble are these Orthodox Israelis that don't even fight in the IDF because they get a religious exemption. And so it's like, I don't know enough about it to like know if that feels true or not, but it's interesting that like he made a lot of effort to like portray some of the Israelis as heroic and accepting of Palestinians. And then he like kind of put the blame on the old school black hats, which I don't know enough about it to know if that's accurate or what.
Yeah. Well, speaking further about how he rolls out some of these conflicts, I mean, you read an awful lot about war. How do you see this book as a war history book? How do you feel like it plays these stories out compared to real histories, like the Studs Terkel book, for example?
Well, I think it's very close to that. And he's done a very good job of trying to make it as true to that spirit as possible. And, the thing he has the advantage of is he doesn't really have to do any work thinking about the motivations of the zombies. They're like kind of like the White Walkers and what's that stupid show everyone likes, Game of Thrones. They're just an unknowable threat. It's not like the Empire where you have to work out Darth Vader's feelings and his relationship to the Emperor and all this stuff, and whether or not, the Empire is a stabilizing force in the galaxy that's rescued everyone from a theocratic rule, or are they fascist? Like, there's none of that. It's just a thing that's coming to fuck everybody up, and you either deal with it or you don't, which I think is easier. But yeah, it makes sense, man. It plays out like, if that happened, I would imagine that this book would be sort of like that. And then the other thing that's cool about it is even the worst of the wars that we've had, things have survived and kind of come back within 10 to 15 years. And I think that's very true to the story of a conventional war like that. Yeah. But I mean, this isn't a conventional war, but you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Something that this really got me thinking about is it's certainly not the first narrative to address zombie apocalypse in a war framework. Mm-hmm. But by doing so thoroughly, what it really got me thinking about is how it's a very standard issue to, in a zombie, let's just say movie, your wife turns and then you've got to kill your wife, and you look into her eyes and you don't see your wife, but you can't bring yourself to kill her. And so, it's not her anymore. And people are screaming, it's not your wife, So this, the way in which zombies are so frequently rolled out as a surrogate for humanity and humanity's issues. But what this really got me thinking about is, if this was war, part of war is you have to successfully dehumanize the enemy for yourself in order to commit mass murder, right? You go from living your life as a truck driver in Jersey, and then you've got to go and murder people in another land, and you have to dehumanize them to be able to do the mental gymnastics to get past that. But you could probably do it so much more easily if they're zombies, right? Like, just these are anonymous hordes, and you can totally overcome that more easily because they are monsters. But does that weigh on you later?
I think
you go to war and you kill people, and you have to come home and you sit with that and deal with PTSD, and all the ways in which veterans have been coping with post-war anxieties is very real. So what if you are totally justified in dehumanizing and slaughtering the enemy, and then you get home and realize, well, it was totally justified and they weren't really human, and my dehumanization of them is real because they're not human, but I did just kill and kill and kill and kill.
Well, there is the chapter that on the audiobook, it's the one chapter that's narrated by Henry Rollins about the soldier that's coming back. I was like, it's funny the voices you immediately recognize, like Mark Hamill, immediately recognize.
Oh, yeah. Common is great.
Yes. Yeah.
They saved the best for near last.
I was like, is that common? Like, what
Yeah.
the fuck? Went and looked it up. It was like there was a bunch of people who I was surprised to have like just been able to recognize their voices so well. But then they're all people I'm into, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so they're definitely like I think. I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like you would probably eventually like you would kill somebody that like reminded you of somebody you loved, and that would probably be hard because there still are humans. But like, I also feel like you would go like. I feel like it's so anonymous and happening so fast, and you like. I feel like most people would probably end up sort of like Tallahassee in Zombieland, where there would be moments where you would break down over the loss of your personal world. But then for the most part, you would just be out there kicking ass and trying to do it as well as you could.
Right. One of my favorite, I wouldn't say parts of the book, but maybe concepts that this book introduces, and I don't remember exactly which chapter who elaborates on this, but the idea of total war is that we have this concept of total war, but it does not exist. However, for the zombies, it does. They don't take
Yes.
breaks. They don't discriminate. They are all collectively totally committed to all-out war at all times.
Yeah, they have no
Which,
supply lines. They have
yes,
no. They don't have to answer to constituents back home.
yep.
Um, yeah,
And
it's
that is actually
interesting.
deeply horrifying to think about.
Oh yeah, it's the xenomorphs from Alien. It's the same thing. It's like a cloud of nihilistic death flowing
Yes.
over you.
Yeah, yeah. It's one thing to be to introduce the fear of the horde. It's another thing to really think about deeply how that horde is anonymously, nihilistically, collectively doom.
Yeah, I think a type of PTSD that's not present in this version of it is like in the versions of zombies where whenever someone dies, they come back to life as a zombie. So like if I like knocked you out with a frying pan and you died, you pop up as a zombie. Like that is not happening in this story. It's all transmitted through bite. So you don't have to worry about like once the zombie threat was taken over, like taken care of, like that's kind of it. So it gives there is like a literal endpoint for this struggle. Like once every single disease carrying zombie was wiped out, including the gigantic catacombs underneath North Korea, which is another super cool part of this book.
Yeah.
That's kind of it. Like the war is over. There's no repatriation or anything like that. You just rebuild it up with whoever's left.
There is the part that it will never be fully back to normal because there are still zombies at the bottom of the ocean. There are still zombies thawing from being frozen that if it happens at just the wrong place at the wrong moment and catches people unaware, it could happen all over again.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's obviously that's very different from a 200 million zombie horde, but it will never be gone forever because there will always be there will always be an unknown zombie somewhere.
Yeah.
World's a big place.
Yeah. You feel though that like his world has learned its lesson or learned some lessons anyway. Like, there
Right.
is people, probably everyone currently living during the novel knows how to deal with a zombie. It's not like you're like, holy fuck, what is that? I don't know, he just bit me. Like there's none of that. It's been, years. So people kind of have their methods down. And then they have like the suburb that's designed to be able to survive the zombie apocalypse. Like another really cool idea. Like the round houses. I thought that was kind of a cool idea.
The barbell, yeah. It's a pretty good
Yeah.
design. Yeah, so there are no flat walls on the outside. So if a zombie horde is pushing against the walls, they can't collapse it because
Yeah.
the pressure is equally distributed all around. It's pretty
Have
good.
you ever been inside a round home, like a geodesic dome house or anything like that?
I've been in domes. I don't think it was ever actually a domestic space.
I've been in a couple like round houses. They just it feels right. Like there's something, I mean, I don't know, it's probably because I've been doing mushrooms all week
Yeah,
and
this is some hippie
reading.
shit.
Yeah. Like, I mean, definitely I've been like reading Buckminster Fuller and re-exploring my relationship with the universe all week. But that stuff has always really appealed to me. Like there's just something very like, it feels as if the world evolved in a different way. When you sit in those round houses,
Yeah.
and maybe we'll get back to that with the onslaught of zombies.
When we do, yes.
Yeah.
And again, speaking of our own world now, that we are not living in a world where people will learn from COVID. Like,
no.
Again, it's just not deadly enough for people to learn from it.
That's right. And then, and I don't mean this to read like being conspiracy theorist or anything like that. It's for sure fucking serious. Like I don't go near anyone. I have like low vitamin D and asthma, so I am not fucking around at all. But if you look at the news, I know everything after everything before it can be ignored or whatever. But when you look at the news, it is pretty confusing. I mean, do you wear a mask this week? Do you not wear a mask this week? The average person is just looking at I heard 1 in 10 people were going to die when this kicked off, and now it just seems like only grandma might die. Like my wife and I, we were talking about like people that we knew personally, not friends of friends, but personally. And we know 2 people, my dad, who was in an old folks home, and a friend of ours that works in a casino. And those are like the 2 worst places to be. And that's kind of it. Like, I don't really know anybody else personally. So it doesn't
who got it, you mean?
Who got it, yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm sure, and I'm not saying that's like a I can't remember what it's called, but there's an argument from incorrect sample size fallacy. That's totally what that is. But what I'm getting at is like a lot of people have that feeling. You know what I mean? They were like, took it really fucking seriously up front. It wasn't in their field of view. The media is obviously indulged in tons of hypocrisy. Like Cuomo's whole fake 14 days in quarantine and all that shit. So it's very hard to trust the news, because the news is just basically they're guilty of malpractice, really, in a lot of cases.
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to go back on what I was saying about trusting in experts. Unfortunately, the first really big thing we were told at the very beginning of all this was, don't wear masks. You don't need to wear masks. They're not going to work. And it turned out that it wasn't misinformation they were working with. It was misinformation they were willfully giving so that first responders and people on the front lines would have enough masks. So that means the first bit of information the American public was told about how to deal with the coronavirus was purposefully a lie, consciously a lie. And it's really hard to roll back from that.
And then you have other things like doctors. There's that video. There's 2 doctors, and I don't know what their motivations are or whatever, but they basically were like, "Hey, look, this is literally what we're seeing in our clinics, and this is why it calls into question the model that was used to shut down the country." And it turns out everyone after that questioned the model that was used to shut down the country, because it had to be updated, because that's how models work. But nobody on the news explains that, really. It's like, hey, here's 30 minutes on how models change over time. But instead, they just scrub that video from the internet. So if you're just like an average person with some kids, you're just going about your day, you're stressed out because your bar job's not happening, all these factors, for normal people, all you know is they said it was stupid to wear a mask. Now we have to wear masks. I don't know anyone who's sick personally. And there's all this shit on the news. And then on top of that, if you're a right-wing news consumer, you're going to get an even more politicized version of the story, and then in your normal life, you're going to run into somebody else who might be defensive about it. So it's very hard for a normal person to get this. And it really, I think Max Brooks's answer that he has in the book is experts get it wrong all the fucking time. Better safe than sorry. That's kind of the mission, or not mission, but that's kind of the story of World War Z is every expert got it wrong in a bunch of different ways. But if we had just done the most conservative thing for our health and safety, everyone would have benefited, and it wouldn't have really hurt anybody. No sweat off anybody's balls, And I think that, to me, that was my approach to this whole thing. I don't care, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. I'm going to fucking stay away from you. That seems to me the most intelligent thing to do. And it's just fucked up that we even have the last 2 minutes of this conversation where we're talking about disbelief and the plan. It's just fucking crazy.
Yes, it seems that there are a couple of things that the world, and especially America, just cannot learn from. And one is the sowing of chaos in social media. It seems that it doesn't matter what side you're politically, what side you're on. Social media and the ability of, let's say, a country like Russia to sow chaos here is really undeniable and really huge. It doesn't matter what side if you want to deny that this happened or that happened, the fact is it is happening all the time.
Yep.
And that's real. And people are on both sides believing the weirdest shit that's being sown on social media. And that has not brought a healthy, intelligent skepticism to the American public when dealing with these questions. And it sort of reminds me of how anti-vaxxers, when they witnessed kids and communities getting sick as a result of not getting vaccinated, it didn't necessarily put an end to that movement, right? And I feel like we're seeing a large-scale version of that at the moment, where we're watching people die and people die and people die, and it's not, the numbers seem to not matter because it's not enough people and it's not close enough, and folks are too ideologically predisposed to double down on their beliefs no matter what the evidence is.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't even know that people, I don't know that people are set up to even think about globally connected pandemic shit. You know what I mean? It's almost too big for people to kind of wrap their eyes around.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to fucking take in.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have an answer for it. I mean, I'm just avoiding the world, which is just fine by me.
Which has
I'm
been your modus
weirdo,
operandi for a long time.
Yeah. I feel like if I simply had been able to get us living out into the country a little bit more before this, I would be as happy as could be.
Yep. Yeah. Did I talk about moving to the suburbs on our last episode?
I don't think so.
Yeah, something that's this has really got me thinking about is I love being urban. I love my urban lifestyle. If I was to move, I would want to move to New York or Berlin or London, some actually more urban place. But the last 3 months, I have participated in urban living not at all. There is almost nothing I have done for the last 3 months that I couldn't have done from a cabin with electricity and a good Wi-Fi connection.
Yep.
And it's kind of made me go oh, if this is actually life now, I could have 3 times the space for the same for less money and accomplish the same amount of things in a day.
Oh yeah. I mean, I watched this homesteading channel called Wrangler Star, and these guys, these family, and the guy is I think for our listeners, probably not going to be to everyone's taste. Just I'll preface that. But what I find interesting is the way that they've gone about kind of balancing being just outside Portland with kind of being on what's basically a farm. And I think that's kind of the sweet spot. That guy could probably keep zombies off of his fence from his house porch with his long distance, sniper rifle, and be just fine. And then if nothing goes bad, he can go into Portland and get himself some cold brew coffee. That to me is the sweet spot. In the Bay Area, I could see living out in Brentwood or something like that, especially when the BART gets out there. That'll be sweet.
I feel like there are a lot of narratives, a lot of TV and movies where that takes place in Oregon, where people live off the land secretly in the woods, and then they come back into Portland to get their Whole Foods and then retreat back to the wilderness.
I mean, that's also the humble grower lifestyle. You have these hill people that just go up there and these kind of more off-grid sites. This was really more during when it was illegal. You'd have just these fucking wooks up there in the woods. They would come into town every few weeks, get their shit, go back up. To me, it's so appealing. It sounds so appealing.
I don't know. I mean, it sounds romantic, but to my mind, it just sounds like The Witch. It just sounds like shitty pioneer living. It just sounds brutal and hungry and lonely.
If you have a group of people, though, it can be pretty delightful. My friend Rosa, she lives up there, and she has kind of a pretty big and growing family. and a lot of her family lived on the farm in Nashville, the famous hippie commune. And so there's this crew of people that are just that at each other's houses all the time and helping each other out and helping each other build decks and shit. Like it's just what I really love about up there and that group of people in particular is it's everything you like about like fantasy Mayberry world without the fucking rednecks. It's like hippies that know how to build things. So it's kind of like this really nice mix of people who are like not fucking square about gay marriage and weed, but not gonna like be horrified if you have an AK-47 under your bed. It's just this mix that I think is really where I wish America would go. Really.
Yeah. Well, it also sounds like the definition of community versus cults.
Totally.
I certainly am very fascinated. I know you are to some degree in people who retreat from urban living and have some sort of a dream that they go and try to play out in, especially Northern California, which has had a long history of that sort of thing. Hippies who are going to go and follow a guru and or a dream. And that stuff is kind of crazy. And because they have this spiritual, ideological belief system, I think it tends to get them into trouble because they're refusing to see what maybe is actually going on, if it's working or not. They're too invested in it working to know if it isn't. And that's very different from a community of people who are just, they're doing their thing. And they're either coming together as a community organically or they're not, as opposed to
Yeah.
feeling spiritually obligated or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I would always be probably pretty suspicious of the religious community, just in general.
Well, I am.
I mean, unless it was, back to our conversation in the last show, it's like, could you imagine a modern witch cult, like a Starhawk type thing, like, aimed for social justice, whatever, like an intentional community like that. I think even under those like benign parameters, things would still go off the rails.
Always makes for a good story, though.
Yeah.
So maybe getting back to the book. So part of what makes this book so fascinating is it really dips into all these stories. It's like a series of short stories about these very disparate lived experiences of the zombie war. But what chapters do you feel like are either missing, like because it's a really essential part of the story that he didn't include, or something that if you were contributing to, this should not have been a movie, this should have been a TV series where every episode is almost like Twilight Zone, like every episode is completely different from the last. It's just another story, separate from separate from separate. What would be a great episode that isn't derived directly from the book?
So it's something that's mentioned in the book, but he doesn't explore it. And I think it's a real shame, which are these like rebel communities, like these groups of people who are
Yes.
just like, we're fine, fuck you. Like, I just imagine it being these like super aggressive, like Country Boy Will Survive, Duck Dynasty areas that were just like almost like the movie Range 15. What I mean? There's probably some people who are like, fuck yeah. And like, and they get to live their best life. They don't go work at the paint store anymore. They hunt and fish all day and kill zombies and fucking make babies and have a big old like polygamy cult, whatever, like whatever that lifestyle looks like. I think it's just missing.
Yeah, it's sort of mentioned by, I think, in one of the American chapters towards the end about retaking America. I think they call it like LMSs,
Well, there's a couple
last man standings,
LMEOs, like the last man, no,
last man on
Elmos,
Earth,
that last man on
Elmos,
Earth.
that's
So,
something like that. Yeah,
yeah. So that would be, to my mind, like the Tom Waits character in Jarmusch's zombie movie, like somebody who's just out there and doesn't realize
yeah,
that the world is back to normal. I'm talking like Hell's Angels have taken over like an area and they are able to rule it because they're basically Vikings. And now there's no police to stop them. And, they figure out like kind of tactically pretty quick how to deal with zombies. Maybe they're in an unpopulated area. Like you can imagine like the Sons of Anarchy characters, like in Charming, sort of maybe pulling this off.
Yeah.
And then maybe like a return to government rule isn't really to their liking. Like maybe they're living their best lives, out there.
Yeah, I think, as I've said, I think before on this podcast, during COVID, we are watching a lot of consolidation of power. People who've already had power are acquiring more and more and more. Billionaires are on the rise
Mm-hmm.
as a very direct result of what's happening. But it's interesting that this book frames that if the chaos were total, that there would be actually opportunities for inversions of power and actually very new forms of power. So,
Yeah, that's really interesting because power kind of goes back to normal pretty quick in this story.
right. But there are all
Yeah.
these new countries, like things, a lot goes back to the way it was essentially, basically it's a completely different world, but, it's still humanity and we still have these power structures that disintegrated. But still, the whole idea of, let's say, New Freeland, right?
Mhm.
People who live in America and take an idea like states' rights to mean their 100-acre commune or what's the word I'm looking for?
Their autonomous zone.
Their autonomous zone. Yes, that could be possible and coalesce if the American government just kind of, in a sense, for a period, ceased to be. And if you got enough people, well, what are you going to do? Kill them all? I mean, you could. You could pull a Waco, but
Yeah. I mean, like the 1800s was like full of that shit. Like the story of Mormonism is the story of just that. Like like the Mormons were in Illinois somewhere or something like that. And then they moved out to Utah. They were basically pushed out. But there was a period of time when Mormons had a larger standing army than the United States did. And that was like terrifying to the United States. And then basically, like, what kept them in check and from expanding was like, the Native Americans were still fucking rocking and rolling back then. Um, so that kept one side of the border a little tight. But like, yeah, it's almost like it takes America back to like the 1800s, territorially speaking. And then you
yeah,
have Aztlan, or what Mexico becomes. Like, I
yeah,
imagine, like, do they have part of San Diego again? Like, does it go up to LA? Like, hey, like where does that land end? And
yeah.
then Russia, by the end of the book, has annexed Ukraine and Belarus, I think, and is coming for other places.
I
Um,
love two things that I think are really fascinating on the extremes of the re-territorialization of the globe is that Cuba has the strongest economy
mhm.
in post-war in this book.
After becoming a democracy,
Yes.
not while being communist.
Right. Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And that Iceland just kind of doesn't exist anymore. Like, just none of them had weapons. They all died. Then that's the end of that story.
I was really curious about that. Like, did he have like a bad layover in Iceland or something like that? Because it's like there's some big tough people in Iceland. Like there's some Viking motherfuckers there. Like all the biggest strongmen are from there. So it's like, were they not? I mean, what the fuck, Max Brooks?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny, of course. Our friend Daniel Coffeen has this list of questions about how to approach a text. And one of them is, what explicit argument or arguments does the piece make? And of course, it's hard not to look at this book. And as we were saying before, how does he feel about China? How does he feel about Israel? How does he feel about America? And it's hard not to go like, whoa, what Icelander? Did you have an Icelandic girlfriend that fucked you over?
Yeah, he's like, Bjork, go fuck yourself, like that.
But at the same time, I get it. Like, okay, the world is in total chaos. Who has the least guns? They're not going to last. Doesn't matter if you were descended from Vikings. If 7/8 of your population turn into zombies, guns are, guns and a large fighting population. People who are quickly able to be organized into battle formations is going to be your
Yeah,
best bet. And so I could see Iceland falling for sure.
yeah,
I could also see something like Indonesia and a lot of Southeast Asia where there's just like water. that kind of terrain would be very, very hard to survive through.
Yeah, unless zombies are just walking up from the shore, like he does kind of kind of lay the groundwork for the idea that they're like weirdly non-affected by pressure and don't seem to decompose in salt water
Yep.
and whatnot. Like,
And
which
they
is kind of
float.
yeah, if they
When their
have like
stomach acids
flotation
bloat.
devices.
Oh no, I was thinking
Yeah,
if
yeah.
their stomachs bloat, the acid makes them float.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So it's like he does kind of like put in this like mechanism for them to sort of float around. The saddest chapter to me is the chapter where the guy's just basically saying that there's no more whales anymore.
Yeah.
Like that to me was the saddest chapter, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh man, this is really uncool.
No, actually, I I choke up in like 1 out of 4 chapters in this book. It's pretty moving, especially the one about dogs. That one's heavy. All the dog
Yeah, yeah,
handlers and them having the highest suicide rate of any division.
yeah. The zombie war has many victims, I guess.
Poor puppies.
Speaking of victims of the zombie war, let's talk about the movie.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was about to say. So, I mean, I am resolutely, vehemently do not care when something goes from one medium to another, how much it carries over. I don't care about
Totally agree.
adaptations.
Totally agree.
I don't give a fuck. But generally speaking, if something doesn't carry over a lot of the original or some sort of spark that the original had, it's usually a sign that something's wrong.
Well, this is a famously troubled shoot. Like
Yes.
they had all kinds of problems with this, but it still made a bazillion dollars. It was the biggest movie for when it opened. It was the biggest movie that had come out since Avatar. It's still to date, I think, Brad Pitt's most successful box office take, and it made more than its money back. Like it globally, it crushed it.
Yep.
They had like guns seized, like all kinds of crazy shit happened in this movie. It was way over.
Yep. And then going back to something we talked about earlier is this book was banned in China and they didn't want the movie to be banned in China, so they made it China friendly by blaming, I think the patient zero was
South Korea.
I thought it was Taiwan, but anyway, and that didn't even work. So Hollywood's whole thing with the Chinese market is really fucking dark and baffling.
Well, it's like that thing where it's like it's not baffling, like they want money. So, that makes it twice as dark, in my opinion. It's just like, okay, well, we're out here, rightfully protesting for every civil right in America at sporting events, but NBA has nothing to say about concentration camps in China.
That's what I'm saying. Or just freedom of speech or.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder if it will persevere in the wake of COVID when Hollywood is able to reopen. So are they still going to rewrite their scripts to include praising scenes of the Chinese government and Chinese tourism in the wake of a disease that was spread by the same totalitarian government that they're singing praises of?
Yeah. Well, Top Gun is doing it.
Yes.
I mean, and I'm so torn now because I just read Val Kilmer's biography and I really want to see his whatever he does in the new Top Gun movie, because apparently it's supposed to be very special and sweet, which, I'm such a fan of Val Kilmer. I just want to see it happen.
You are? What?
Oh, I love him. He's great.
He's the worst.
Why do you think he's the worst?
He's a narcissistic, whatever. You know what? I am sorry. I just expressed an opinion about the personal life of a Hollywood star. I don't care. Never mind.
Yeah. Well,
sorry. Let's get back to the movie.
I think he's delightful. But anyway, the reason why we're even bringing up Top Gun is there's a patch on the back of Tom Cruise's famous leather jacket from the first Top Gun. And it's a combat over China during the Korean War patch of some sort. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. But it's to commemorate this battle that fucking happened, and they have changed the flag on the jacket to a more neutral event so as to not have to edit it out in China. And I think that is fucking I understand doing it for a bunch of movies. Like if you want to change some shit in Spy Kids or something like that, but this is a movie that is supposed to represent 80s America and patriotism. And if that movie is sullied by this bullshit, then shut the fuck up with any of your, Hollywood patriotism going forward. I mean, I get it. Most people find it distasteful or whatever, but there's something just insanely hypocritical about it happening in the Top Gun movie with an actual factual event. Like it just bugs the shit out of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That shit's everywhere.
But I'm still out, so I'll probably just have to pirate it off the internet so that
I can
see it without supporting it. Yeah.
Well, that's what we should do with all Tom Cruise movies anyway. So.
Nah, Tom Cruise is great. Risky Business, Interview with the Vampire.
Those are not good movies.
What?
You heard me. The World War Z, I think, is also so. Knowing what happened behind the scenes definitely informs watching it, but I mean, it really could not be a more sort of okay. So behind the scenes, it's exactly everything that's wrong with Hollywood. Just rewriting the ending, completely rejecting the source material for fluff. Everything that went wrong with that movie. But then when you watch it, I had completely forgotten that the first scene, it's our hero waking up in a beautiful, bright, sunny room with his family, and he's doing the like cuddle puppy pile with his daughters, and they're laughing, and he makes pancakes, and it is so cliche. It is the biggest Hollywood cliche to have the hero literally rolling around with his kids in the first scene to establish that he's a family man. Mm-hmm. And it does not really rise above that for the rest of the movie. It tries to establish him as a character. There's no character there. There's just a bunch of action sequences, but they try to establish his character in the most cliched way possible.
Yeah, it's funny. His like background is as vague as John Wick's background, but like completely uninteresting, even though it should be completely interesting.
Well, at least John Wick is mysterious. In this, it's just, you just don't care.
Yeah. I mean, I watched it last night and my wife was trying to remember if she had seen it. And she's like, well, what happens? I was like, I don't remember. And she's like, I thought you watched it last night. I was like, I did. And that's the thing about it. It's so immemorable. It has elements that, like the opening credit sequence is cool. It's a little done over. Like it's basically like, it looks like a 70s exploitation version of the same zombie opening we ever get, which is just like, stock news footage designed to make crowds look terrible and evil and fucked up. And but I think the angular type treatment on it, that sideways scroll, I think looks pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And you feel like, and it actually does, like the movie does have a bit of like a 70s like spy thriller feel. You can tell it's like kind of trying to do that. Like maybe it wants to exist in like a Bourne Identity world, but it just doesn't. And I think the reason why it fails so much of that is it introduces like what I would just describe as low budget zombie effects. Like CGI zombie is fucking terrible. It's super stupid. Even like the blood from the Israeli soldier when she gets her stump cut off, like has some fucking Tarantino blood spray going down. Yep. Like why have like digitally enhanced whatever? Like I mean, you could have like a real effect right there. I just do not understand that shit.
The one thing that I will credit this movie with is, and this is only possible with CGI, unfortunately, is the swarm. I thought that was, I wouldn't say well executed, but I don't know that I've ever seen that in a zombie movie or TV show. Just that quantity of zombies moving that quickly and that aggressively, creating a completely different possibility for what we've seen in zombie cinema before that.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and one of the things I think that makes it successful is that it's an idea borrowed from nature. Like that's how ants attack shit, like or some ants do, and then it sort of in that opening sequence kind of foreshadows it, which I think is, it's a filmic, it's a big fancy film way of doing something, I guess, Yep. So yeah, very very cool, but it still looks like shit to me. Like,
it looks terrible, and it's funny. It reminds me a lot of I Am Legend, which is another movie that took an already existing, very beloved novel and ruined what was most interesting about it. And they both do it similarly. I mean, this I Am Legend just completely inverts the ending and takes away the whole meaning of the original book, which is it's fine for it to do something different than the book, but it does it in the most pat, simplistic way possible, and it's really forced. And this movie,
Hmm.
it's really forced too. The way that he is instrumental in winning. Well, first of all, the book, what's interesting about the book is the way humanity just kind of wins the war in, like World War II. It's not like, oh, well, Americans dropped the bomb and that's how we won the
Yeah.
war. Um, this story is about the collective efforts of all these different people doing radically different things and slowly winning the war through these battles. Whereas World War Z is about we have one person and he's the only person who could figure it out. It's just so forced and such bullshit.
Yeah.
Zombies
Well,
are going to know that you have a life threatening disease, and that's how we're going to win the war. And it took
yeah.
one valiant man who was on his one last job. It's like, I'm
Right.
retired. I'm coming out of retirement and I'm going
Yeah. Well,
to literally save humanity.
totally.
Ugh.
I'm glad you brought that up because, like, it's essentially like it's a Hollywood star driven hero epic, right? And
Yep.
what's cool about war stories, like real war stories, is that even the most heroic person, they're a person like all the really good war noirs I've written, like the person who wrote them and survived it is generally speaking like a badass. But they are also lucky. Like they all say, I was not even in the top that deserve to live. And so there's this whole idea of like collective effort. Like people can be heroes and heroism is real, but it only exists within the collective, which is what's cool about the book. There's no center of the book. Like, I mean, the narrator is essentially like a non-voice and he rocks it like Stud Sterkel does, which you don't really get the personality of the interviewer in there, which is the way it should be. And there's no focus on anybody, like, and that's what's cool about it is it shows this diversified human experience, and in a way it's utopian. Like there doesn't need to be a center of power, there doesn't need to be a fucking Jesus figure, Harry Potter bullshit hero with a thousand faces thing,
Yep.
unless you got Brad Pitt, then yeah, I guess you got to have that.
It's, I really wish he would follow this book up with more stories.
You mean like more zombie stories?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite curious about his new book that is, it sounds like it's written in a very similar style. It's a lot of short anecdotes about a sort of left-wing intentional community and Sasquatch. Like I don't know. I barely skimmed. I'll totally read it, but
Huh.
it's not getting the greatest reviews. But it sounds like it's very much in this format. But I wish there was another book of more stories. I want to know more. He's thought this thing through very thoroughly. I want to get more of this world he's created because the world building is outstanding in this book.
Yeah, well, he's clearly a capitalist. Like one of the things I thought was really interesting is, well, not interesting, what I thought was kind of funny was he talked about how Alan Moore gets to complain because The Watchmen, he never had the option to turn down the movie. Like, so Alan Moore gets to rage. He's like, he cashed a check, so he can't say shit, you know?
Yep.
So clearly he's okay with the success of it, which as he should be. And so I'm surprised there haven't been like, collections of like in the world of World War Z. You know what I mean? Like I could imagine, like get like 12 different authors together and
Yeah.
have them just crank out more stories within that world. It seems like I would buy that book.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, people are doing it with Octavia Butler. People have clearly done
Exactly.
it with Lovecraft for days.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be great. God, maybe we should write one. Maybe we should start
Yeah.
that. Hey, if there are any publishers out there, we can edit it.
If you write one, I'll write one and maybe we'll put it in the newsletter.
All right. Shit.
What would yours be about?
Oh my God, I don't even know. Indonesia would be cool. See, the thing is, all I know is all I know about is like mid-century New York artists and new age music and synthesizers. So like, I think a story about somewhere in Indonesia would be super fascinating, but I don't know anything about that. If I wrote about what I do know, what I know is me, and I would be the first to die. So that story is not necessarily so interesting.
Huh.
You do great.
Let's see.
This world
Off the top.
is like made for your
Okay.
temperament.
Here we go. Opening scene, furry party. Outbreak happens, shit goes wild. People have figured out that within their furry costumes, they're harder to get bitten. So the furry costume becomes an advantage. And so there becomes a gang of like furries running around with like ammo bandoliers and shit. And they're just like fighting their way through Portland.
Well, if you are a LARPer, which is very furry adjacent in some senses,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of the world that this book creates is that conventional weapons are actually very, very useful.
Oh, dude, if you're one
And
of
so
those
if
like,
you're a LARPer
yeah,
and you take
totally.
swordplay and you have a mace or a battle axe and you've just been itching for like someone to break in your house so you can use your battle axe and finally prove your worth as a man, the zombie apocalypse would be your moment, right?
Yeah, he like Max Brooks in another. He talks about how like a lot of like the people who kind of like comment on the book, like it's a lot of people like. Well, one of the reasons why people like zombies so much is it gives them an ability to like kind of fantasize about how like if all the societal things that keep them from being an alpha male were removed, then they could be an alpha male. It's kind of interesting idea.
I'm
Uh,
sorry, can
that
you
like
elaborate that? I'm
Oh, he was talking about like, and basically he was kind of discussing the different kinds of fans, the people who, somebody was basically at one of the talks, somebody said, "Hey, this isn't that scary of a book," and he's like, "Yeah, and in fact, that's intentional." You know, he's like, the people who really had the biggest problem with World War Z, the only negative reviews were people who like are really into getting scared when they read horror, and they just didn't find it very scary. And then and within the context of that answer he gave, he talked about like another kind of cohort of fans are like the people who just like, like the incel machine gun guy, the dude that has like a perfect, like super expensive AR-15 with every single mall ninja accessory on it possible. And he's just waiting for his moment when like the Chads will not be able to keep him down any longer and he can go out and kick some ass. Like there's that guy is a fan of this book, you know. I feel pretty strong about my, that said, like all of that, I feel pretty strong about my ability to survive the apocalypse or the
yeah,
zombie apocalypse. Specifically Max Brooks' zombie apocalypse, I think I would do pretty
yeah,
well in.
yeah. I am fully Iceland.
No, I mean, it's funny. Like my wife and I were talking about like, what's the physical skill that would kind of be the best in an apocalypse? If you could carry 40 pounds at a pretty fast clip, you could survive Max Brooks' apocalypse.
True.
And if you were pretty careful where you slept at night, and like in Parable of the Sower, like when they move around as kind of a group and then they have a watch and stuff like that. And that's kind of like the thing that they're coming together as a group to watch out for each other is what sort of allows them to survive. I think if you had a crew of pretty reasonably fit people that were getting along, you could do well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, if we learned anything from Zombieland, it's just a couple of things you got to have down.
Yeah.
Give you a
Stay
good
away from big
chance.
cities. Yeah.
Yep. Cardio.
What's so fun about this book when it came out, and even more so the Zombie Survival Guide, is like if you were like a fan of zombie movies before the early 2000s, like you had those conversations. Like the number of times I had conversations about like what would be the best gun to carry or like what your kit would look like. Like I had, especially when I was bartending, like I was thinking about before the internet was on everybody's phones and you sat and talked in bars, like those conversations were so weird and funny, and you could get really deep into the most insane shit just to entertain yourselves. This book, it's sad that this book has become like a movie and Reddit thread and all this stuff, because it's like it takes out the ability to just imagine that shit for yourself.
Yeah.
Or maybe you still can or whatever, but like now you can go find an endless amount of really well researched top 10 things you should carry during the zombie apocalypse. And it feels a little bit like how the early days of the UFC were kind of the most fun, when you'd have a guy with like one boxing glove versus a sumo wrestler, like
Yeah.
just these wilder, untested ideas.
You wouldn't know what's going to happen at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. You can carry one long range weapon, one hand to hand weapon. What are you carrying for each?
I know nothing about guns, so I am going to assume. Well, okay, it depends on where I am. If I'm in a city, I'm going to say pistol of some sort, and
Mm.
I don't know one pistol from the next. Probably a revolver. Uh, no, something with a big clip.
Oh, you just did the clip thing. Okay, so you're excused because you're Canadian, but Max Brooks calls magazines clips all
Magazine.
throughout this book.
I'm sorry. You're
Oh,
right.
it drives me.
Magazine. I'm
And
sorry.
for you, I don't care that you do it. I care that Max Brooks does it because this book is so well researched. Otherwise, it
What
just
if I use the
feels
word
like
cartridge instead of bullet? Does that win me back a few points?
sure, sure.
Thank you. Um, but I
And
think if
that's just nerd shit.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
No one cares about that stuff.
I think if I was out in the wilderness or rural areas or even suburban areas, some sort of a rifle would probably be
Hmm.
better. I'm just assuming that if I'm in an urban area, I'm going to be dealing with more close quarters situations, which maybe a pistol is a little better for. Whereas if I'm out in more space, maybe a rifle to defend a greater parcel of land and have better aim would be the better thing.
Mm.
Um, and short range, you mean like something for blunt force trauma?
Yeah, hand to hand.
Yeah, maybe just like a modified tire iron, like a tire iron with like grip tape on one end.
Yeah, it's a good call. Grip tape.
Seems good because I could use the curved end to bash heads and the sharp end to open car doors and house doors and pry things and as more of a tool, maybe.
Yeah. That's like a crowbar is an excellent general purpose apocalypse thing because you're going to be opening doors and shit all the time.
Yeah, and it's not really sharp, so it's not like a something that you could are as likely to injure yourself with if you had like a bladed weapon or something like that.
Yeah.
And a baseball bat is great, but you have to wind them up, whereas
Hmm.
a crowbar you can jab.
Yeah.
Also the pokey end, you can just like jab it into a head, whereas you can't do that with a baseball bat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you?
Well, the firearm, I think the best answer is like probably some sort of like tactical equipped Ruger 1022, which is a 22 rifle. And so what's cool about that is like you could carry like thousands of rounds of 22 because it's really small, and all you got to do is like bust the zombie's head open with it. Like you could for sure kill zombies with 22s, and then you can kill small game like rabbits and stuff like that. Like second choice would probably be like maybe some sort of shotgun. I don't know. But the first choice, I'd probably go with some sort of like forced axe, like something that could be useful as a tool,
Yeah.
but you could also like crack skulls with it. And then you could also open doors with it if you wanted to.
Yeah. How's my estimation of pistol for urban versus rifle for rural? Does that make sense? Or am I just,
Well,
I mean, I'm kind of
the
thinking out loud as someone who doesn't think about guns too much.
the real gun craze guys, they'll say that your pistol is for fighting your way to your rifle.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so the rifle is pretty much always going to be, they're just more accurate. You have more rounds. Like it's just, if you're trying to kill stuff, especially slow zombies, you could just get up on a roof and just end everything near you. And then if something was within 10 feet of you, like the pistol would be the way to
I
go.
guess I was thinking about like being in buildings and among buildings, very close quarters, but
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
yeah, there's all kinds of people have all kinds of different, like they have like short barreled machine guns, like, that are basically what people use when they clear rooms and things like that. And then, another kind of like cool way of going about it would be if you didn't want to do the 22, you could get like a pistol cartridge carbine, which is like a gun that shoots like it's like a rifle. It looks like a rifle, but it's like set up with it's basically a pistol with rifle shit around it. And they have some pretty slick Glock ones. So you could have like a Glock sidearm. You could have a pistol and a rifle that use the same magazines, which is kind of cool because then you could just carry one type of very common
Yeah,
ammunition around.
that sounds
Like
like
that
a
would be
must.
yeah, that and like an axe. I think you'd be pretty good to go.
Yeah.
I feel like dressing like Rob Halford would be the way to go though, too. Like if you had just all leather with spikes all over it, like
With
you could
studs,
just,
absolutely.
yeah,
So inspiring. Yeah,
yeah,
the metal battle vest. If you got a lot of black metal band patches, that'll just give you a little bit of extra armor, I guess.
yeah. Where would you want to go? Like if you're like, let's get out of here. Where's your destination?
I don't know. I don't know. The advice is all about going rural, but yeah, cities are fucking dangerous for so many reasons. But
Hmm.
it's also where all the produce and canned goods are mostly hoarded. You would just hope to, what would be perfect is if you lived out in the middle of nowhere where there was some sort of warehouse that was a midpoint for shipping to Costco's and things like that.
Yeah. If you lived in like a rural area that was recently decimated by an Amazon warehouse, that's probably
Right.
like a pretty good spot to be, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be perfect. We're reading The Road for an upcoming episode we're doing with Daniel Coffeen, and that definitely brings a lot of questions to when you're out and scavenging, where are you actually going to find things when things have been picked over. But it's funny, it's hard to say. The Road is clearly but we'll talk about this more then, but it's a post-apocalypse. It is an apocalypse landscape that clearly deteriorated over a long period of time. Whereas if there was a sudden zombie apocalypse, there might be entire warehouses full of food that people didn't even have time to go and raid.
Yeah, totally. There's that great scene in the book The Road where they find the area that has all the supplies in it that someone hasn't been able to get back to. Like there's probably shit like that all over America.
Yeah, and like underground bunkers that have been forgotten, that are
Yeah.
hiding. Yeah. So many ways to die, so many ways to survive.
Yep.
So what have we learned?
Well, we have learned don't go to Iceland when zombies are afoot.
Maybe just avoid it altogether.
Yeah.
Can never be too safe.
I don't know. What do you think this would make a good Netflix series? That's what everybody
Yes.
seems to want. They want like every episode to be different.
Yeah, I mean, when I read it, I hoped that it would be turned into a series where every episode is a completely different story exploring this world. I question Netflix's ability to do it properly.
Mm.
They're a little inconsistent. So maybe HBO actually, not Blumhouse because they can't do TV. Oh, what a disappointment, Blumhouse! Please step it back up. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, you can't win them all.
No. Yeah. Is that it?
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess I'm happy for this to just not become anything else. I think it's a
Yeah. Yeah.
cool, like, I kind of like, I agree with your overall, like, I don't care if the thing ends up looking different than it, but I often don't think it, like, not every book needs to be a movie. You know what I mean? Like
Very true.
it doesn't need to do that, especially if it ends up being a bad one. But then again, you end up with this really cool singular shit sometimes, like Rumblefish, which is, the book Rumblefish definitely didn't need to be a movie, but the movie is awesome.
God, I haven't seen that in forever.
Nicolas Cage, Tom Waits,
Yeah.
Dennis Hopper, such a good cast.
All right. I guess that's it.
All right.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay healthy.
Stay safe.
COVID is large. You know what? Fuck it. I'm not. Let's just scratch all that.